It's another edition of Saturday with Seniors here, as always brought to you by Hemingway General Contractors. And hey, air conditioning season's coming up. Maybe you need the service there. Maybe your furnace needs some repair work. Maybe you're not happy with your furnace bills. Have you looked into Lux Air furnaces? They sell them. They're 95% efficient. That'll save you on your bill. And if you get your Lux Air furnace from Hemingway, you get a 10-year part and labor warranty that's included absolutely free. Call them at 662-6997. And part two with Fred Metarko in our studio. I really thought it was going to be a one-part show, but this guy's sharp. He's got a lot of memories. He's 82 years old. You'd never know it looking at it or listening to him. And these are the type of things that I love to learn about because, well, 50 years from now, we're not going to be able to learn about them unless we document them. And my life, the same thing, because, I've seen changes, but it's amazing all the way through. So we talked a lot about Wellsboro and memories there in the last segment. And at this point, you're in Whitneyville. Where were you living in Whitneyville?
We went to school in Whitneyville, and there were three buildings, the main building and then the two outbuildings. And first grade was in the main building, the second grade was in the right-hand building, and third grade was in the left-hand building, and then you came back into the main building for the other classes. And it had the big fire escape that you would go down when we had fire drills, and there were swings on the playground, and there was a place to play ball.
This is something I can't picture in Whitneyville. This is a couple-story building or three buildings?
It was a couple-story building, and it was a big thing. They've torn it down, and there's another building in its place. It's right across from the church that's there, the big church. And we'd go on vacation for time off, and you'd come back and you'd smell the oil. They oiled the floors to keep the dust down.
The same way we would oil our roads to keep the dust down? Literally, would they be slippery? Or?
it was just, you'd smell the oil, and there was dark wood floors.
You're the same guy who burnt tires on Hills Creek Lake to stay warm when you were playing hockey on there. You were dumping oil on school floors, no problem.
Yeah, back then that wasn't the problem. And then if you didn't bring your deer meat sandwich, which most people brought at the time, you ordered your lunch, and the Robies were in the building next door, and they cooked all the food. And the teacher would send a couple kids over from each class to bring over the big trays of food. And when you were a little kid, you got scared and you made sure you didn't drop it because that was lunch for the rest of the kids.
Okay, so this wasn't a certified kitchen like we would have today. This was what, a volunteer that cooked the food or an employee in another house?
An employee in another house. She cooked all the food for the area. And
deer meat, whatever you brought in, roadkill, raccoon.
Well, it was usually a thing like Spanish rice or something like that, a casserole type thing. And the teacher would dish it out to the people that bought their lunch. And it was different.
Yeah. Did you pay?
You paid so much, a few cents for the meal.
Yeah. Did they provide milk in school, or you brought your own food, or there was a cow back, help yourself?
You could get your milk and you could get your food, but otherwise you brought your lunch. And then you went out to play. I can remember the first grade teacher, they had the ruler. If you didn't behave, they'd tap you with the ruler. And you got different things done like that.
Corporal punishment was common then, and I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing, but was it effective?
I think so. People, I think, paid attention a lot better then than they do now.
Respect for teachers was a very different...
Right, or you got stood in the corner or things like that.
Was this a modern school, or were we talking coal stove type slate board, inkwell desks type school?
Well, you had your separate desk, but like in the outbuildings, you had to help stoke the fire to keep warm. And
how old were these kids they were sending out to stoke the fire? Like just any age?
Well, the fire was right in the classroom on the second and third grade rooms, and
so wood stoves in the room, and the students would stoke them.
Second and third grade kids that would help bring the wood in and do that. So, and then where the church is now on Route 6 on the hill up there, the new church building.
The college is now, or was?
Was the college?
Where I want to call it WAC, but that was kind of the Wellsboro Area Community College at one point. Yeah.
That used to be the high school up there. And then later on, what we would do is we'd ride the bus, pick us up at Tomahawk, and take us up to those schools, and then take the other ones up to the high school. And later when we combined with Wellsboro, they did away with the high school up there.
Was the community up in arms when they were closing the school? We've had a lot of schools close in the last 10 years around here, and it's been very divided amongst people about what to do about that. Was that a thing back then, or were people seeing that as progress and excited about it, or
Well,
you don't remember?
There were a lot of people that didn't want it to happen and that, but I think it was a good thing because it got us in here into Wellsboro together, and I think it was better. My grade was the first year that spent a full year in the new school, which is not the new school that's now.
The new old school, yeah.
The new old
the
school.
administrative building now.
And with the first year, and that's the first year they brought football back.
There wasn't football before that. I didn't realize that. Was soccer before then? It surprises me when I read about soccer was at some points as big, or I guess maybe in this case bigger than football, or was that not the dominant sport?
I didn't play sports.
Yeah,
and
but it was a big thing when football came.
It was a big thing when football came, and we had an undefeated season. And I think the reason for that was because Coach Johnson and Dybert made us work so hard, and we were all in good shape. And we didn't have the time to really learn a whole lot of plays, but we were good, and I think we tired the other teams down.
What else do you remember about school? There's certainly a lot of changes. You know, we have issues now with kids bringing cell phones into school and whatever, but obviously those weren't issues.
Well,
what could you do and couldn't you do that you can now or couldn't do now?
Well, I remember if someone had a gun and they wanted to repair it, they could bring it in the shop class, and the guys would put them in their lockers, and there was no problem. And everybody had their hunting gun hanging in the back of their truck, and they'd go out at noon, and they'd show them to each other and discuss them and go through them, and there was no problem at the time. Plus, when fishing season was, I remember skipping school, hitchhiking down below Gailton and fishing, and the next day coming back, and the teacher would ask, how were they?
There wasn't a problem. Was like, how did it go? Did you have a good day out there?
They knew what you were doing. So,
did more people fish and hunt in high school in those days? Was it kind of cool to do that, expected to do that? Because I think, unfortunately, our youth are losing that.
Yeah, I think more people did, and I think back when we were living on Shumway Hill, it was a means to get a lot of your food, because we ate a lot of stuff like rabbits and grouse and pheasants and deer. So
when you brought that home, Mom was happy. It was like when the cat brings home a mouse, what it wants you to think.
Every once in a while, you'd say, well, we got to have something for supper, and you'd go on out and get a squirrel or a rabbit or something like that.
That's when a 22 shell was a penny.
Yeah, and we had guns sitting at the doorway, and the kids knew not to take them and go out and shoot somebody, because they've been shooting animals, and they know once they shoot them, they're dead.
Yeah.
And now I don't think some of these kids realize that.
Some go to the grocery store and they think that the food comes from a truck.
Yeah. Yeah. So somebody was asked recently, where do you get your meat? And they said, well, the grocery store,
Sure. So at this point, you didn't have a car, and was hitchhiking common when you were growing up?
Oh, yeah. Some old guy would meet you and pick you up, and he'd tell you stories and that along the way, and you didn't have to worry about anything. Even when my kids grew up, I had my kids on Shumway Hill, where I live now. Even back then, which is a lot later, the neighborhood had a lot of kids in it, and they'd get together and play, and each parent knew where they were at the time. And we called them free-range kids.
I like the term, yeah.
Because they didn't have to worry about going out to the neighborhood. And
they could be in any yard, anywhere, and they were safe and new friends. And
One time, my son and a bunch of the kids were riding bicycles. They went all the way up to Antrim, and they got thirsty, so they went in the bar room and asked for water. And the guys gave them water, and they were okay with it. So, it was safe back then, but I wouldn't let them do that now. I'd keep more track
and
of
if
them.
you did, the public would look down on you like you're not taking care of your kids properly.
Right.
When did you get your first car?
Oh, boy. I think my first car was a 57 Ford. And I think I paid something like $500 for it. But
that's quite a bit back then.
Yeah.
I've had a few people on the show that have bought $50 and $60 first cars.
Yeah,
so you were doing well.
It was pretty good shape.
Yeah.
And our parents had cars, but they didn't drive. And one car they had was an old Hudson, the big Hudson that had the back seat. It was like a couch, and you stepped down to get in the car.
Yeah.
And that was like a tank. And,
a barge, a party barge, yeah.
And you drove that thing around, as far as learning to drive, I learned to drive helping people hay it and that, backing hay trucks into the barn and things like that, and the tractors.
In the early days, I think a lot of kids learned with farm equipment, and now in the later days, they're learning with side-by-sides, four-wheelers, and those type of things. You take city kids that have never pushed a gas pedal or pulled a throttle or steered anything but a bicycle in their life or anything motorized, they don't have the respect for that. Farms were dangerous. Did you spend much time on farms? Did you have any friends that had any kind of serious injuries on the farms, or schoolmates that did? I know that.
Not that I remember, but
I know people are extra careful, but boy, you look at that old equipment with belts and everything open and no guards. And
well, I remember back when we were on the farm that we had a buzzsaw to cut wood with, and my dad cut his arm quite a bit with that. I remember that. And then we had a washer that sat on the front porch that had a gas engine on it that had a ringer on it and that, and you had to kickstart that. And when you were a little kid and tried to do that, sometimes it'd kick you right off. So there were a lot of machinery back then, and you had to learn how to repair it too. I mean, they used to say a farmer could repair anything with a piece of wire, so.
Yeah, that was before the invention of duct tape.
Yeah.
You mentioned ice skating on Hills Creek, roller skating too. I was reading a little bit of your sort of notes there. Did you roller skate, and where'd you go?
Yeah, Mansfield had a nice rink over there, and a lot of the kids would get together on Saturdays and roller skate over there, and I got pretty good. I could roller skate backwards and all that stuff. It was a good time. Ice skating was on Hills Creek Lake.
That was the common place. And how about movies? Back then, Blossburg had a theater, Mansfield had a theater, Wellsboro had a theater. Did you go out to the movies much, or was about half of our guests didn't because money was tight when they were a kid, and the other half did? And do you remember a couple of your favorite early movies that you saw?
Well, for a while, I worked for the Arcadia Theater down there, changing signs out front.
Did you work for Frank Dunham or for someone before that, Larry Wooden?
Dunham's there. Mm-hmm. And I would take down the posters out there and change the marquee, and I'd get in to see some of the movies. So I was thinking back, and I said, boy, if I would have kept some of them posters that I took down.
Yeah.
And because the people sell them for a lot of money nowadays.
Well, the reason they're worth a lot of money is because nobody kept the posters. If everyone kept them, then they wouldn't be worth any money.
But I would do that, and then I'd get up into the projector room sometimes and watch that. So,
and back then were they using carbide, burning the carbide sticks, or was it electric? You don't remember. My dad worked in a theater where they actually had to use tongs with carbide sticks. That he was told they were so hot that if they ever dropped them on the floor instead of the bucket of water, that they would go through the floor to the next story. They were that hot.
I can imagine that, because I remember when the miners had these carbide lamps that they wore, and they were pretty hot. So.
Did you ever go to the theater in Mansfield? Did you, the Twain Theater?
Yeah, I went there, and not too often. Like you said, you didn't go to the movies and do that stuff. Yeah. A lot back then.
And then the drive-in theater was in between, too, the Y drive-in theater.
Oh, yeah. I was there a few times. And back then, there was a lot of dances around for the kids. Dances in Blossburg and Mansfield and over in the valley.
Not barn dances, but stuff for the kids. What were they barn
dances? And high school dances and that. Like I and a bunch of other guys would go to Tioga and Mansfield and Elkland and over there, and they had a big barn over there with hay bales, and they'd have a band in there, and you'd have round and square dancing. And
probably people were smoking in there, and there was hay bales and no fire equipment, and again, you all survived it.
Yeah, and
so you drove home without seatbelts on.
Yep, so much different back then than it is now. They don't get together and do that now.
Did they ever really end, or did they just fade away? And did we even see them fading away as they did? These things disappeared over time.
Yeah, you look back and you notice they're not there anymore.
Well, you've done a lot of work to create the Wellsboro Booster Club, which still to this day is an important community organization. And I didn't know until I met you just a little bit ago that you were one of the founders of that. How long ago did that start? What inspired you? And toss some names around about how they got going.
Well, it was when my kids were in high school and my son was playing sports, and it was like a basketball game. I would get out there in the middle of the floor and have people come down and shoot baskets for candy or something, trying to get interested in the sports. And then we started having the band at different things and trying to get interest and trying to get enough so that it could build it up, and then we could give people monies to go to school and to go get into sports. But there were a couple involved, and I had to write letters to get things done and that. But we got it going, and it's going great now.
Yeah, thanks to people like you. You probably had no idea when you were starting this that in 2023 you'd be on the radio talking about it still going strong. And
No, that makes you feel good.
our youth are our future, and sports is one of the few things left that they can do without a computer screen in front of them. Were you in Scouts? Were you in any other civic organizations when you were younger, FFA or choir or any?
No, I wasn't. I was interested in electronics, and I built my own CB radio at one time. And until one day I got up on the hill and I made my call letters, and some guy gave them back to me, but he did them different, and I was calling myself, and I gave up. He put them in a different, instead of like 1, 2, 3, 4. He said 1, 2, 3, 4, and then
Yeah,
spit it up. And I was so busy trying to call, I didn't realize it. And
yeah.
I said, I gave it up.
You were actually producing electronics products too at one point, where Trucklight is now. I didn't realize there was anything there before that. I always assumed that building came out of the ground as Trucklight when it popped out of the ground. But what was it before Trucklight, and what kind of work did they do?
It was a Mercantile Linotype company, and they built phototype settings equipment,
Photo stuff?
like typesetting stuff. And,
Typesetting. Okay.
Yeah. Improvement from the old Linotype machines that they used to set and type and lead, and then they build the pages. These things set the pages and
For newspaper type things?
for
or
newspapers and magazines.
printing, so for printing press
For printing,
type things, what they
yes.
needed. You
Yeah.
worked with a lot of lead.
Well, in the early days you did, but then later on, they had these big units when I first started there that would fill up, about half of this room, about 12 by 8 high or something like that. And they were all capacitors, resistors, transistors, and diodes and wire harnesses and all that.
Big heat makers.
They were huge, and they had all these doors you open up. And by the time they closed up in Wellsboro, it was a tabletop unit, like one of the first computers.
And then over time, that whole industry became obsolete with the way their printing was
The old
done.
Linotype
Yeah.
machines, yeah, they used to have them in the Gazette when I worked in the Gazette, or not the
Agitator.
when I worked at the Agitator. And I worked part-time there melting lead for the
Yeah.
lead machines.
The Wellsboro Gazette's been around for a long, long time, but back until the 50s, 60s, somewhere in there, right, the Agitator existed. And if you look really closely at the Dean Center building, they used to be Dunham's Furniture, you can still faintly see the Agitator letters on there.
Oh, yeah?
That was one of their offices. Yeah, if the sun hits it just right, as of a few years ago, you could still
It was
see it on there.
Honey and Art DeMall that were the owners and ran it. And when I was waiting for the lead to melt into the thing, I'd go upstairs and get one of their hand presses, and I'd run off a few of the jokes they had in the files there, so I could
Yeah.
distribute them.
And so the newspaper would come out once a week. Nobody knows what a newspaper boy is, or a newspaper person, I guess you'd call it these days, but newspaper boy was the term. Delivering newspapers to homes. And Wellsboro had, I assume, newspaper boys back then, which is, again, another occupation that's like the Iceman, where to go.
Yeah, well, you read them around with your bag of papers, and you'd throw them up on the stairs, and then you'd collect at the end of the week or so.
I'd heard stories of people waiting for the Elmira paper to arrive at the railroad station in Wellsboro, across from the Wellsboro House, the train station, just waiting for the news to come in to pick up their copy of the paper, because that was the way to get the freshest news of yesterday.
Yeah.
As opposed to today, we get the news, well, you know.
Yeah. Mentioning the railroad station, that was one thing that was really a thing to come see in Wellsboro, was when the train came up through the canyon. And when they took that out, I felt bad about it, because I think that could have been a big thing now, because they could have brought people in from all directions, north and south, to visit Wellsboro.
Once those things are gone, they don't come back.
Yeah.
I mean, let's just say they don't come back. It's so difficult. But yeah, that was 82 or 83, they ripped up, I want to say, maybe 92.
Yeah,
Can't remember.
They ripped up all the rails and made the trails.
Eventually, the rail trails. About 10 years when it was just crushed stone in there before it got all put together into what it is today. But wow. Any other closing thoughts, memories that you have that you want to share? Stories that, hey, if they're more than 50 years old, you can share them. No one's getting in trouble. It's okay.
When I worked down to the Painted Post at Ingersoll Rand, I rode with a guy, got me into bass fishing. And from there, I bought a boat, got a big car to pull it, bought a bigger boat, got a bigger vehicle to pull it. And from there, I wrote stories for the Mountain Home magazine of my fishing stuff. So I've been writing there. And so they're memories from the past now. So
Yeah, a lot of good memories fishing. And so how recently did you write for Mountain Home?
I wrote for 8 years, and I had 60-some stories published, and I won 3 awards for writing from the Keystone Press.
Wow, congratulations
So-
on that.
And I had a lot of fun doing it, and a lot of people enjoyed being wrote about in the magazine, and they were like famous for a little while. So
Well, great. Well, hopefully we made you famous for a little while here, too. Thank you for joining us here on Saturday with Seniors. It's actually a 2-part edition, so if you enjoyed today's show, you can hear the first half if you go to, and you can hear all other previous programs, to youtube.com. And if you do a search Saturday with Seniors, our hometown country Saturday with Seniors, you'll find that there. You're going to say something else?
well, I hope you'll do a lot of editing.
And by the way, if you'd like to be a guest on the show, we do want to let you know that we do record this ahead just so everybody feels comfortable. And actually, your show is going to need very little editing, just a few little tighten ups here and there, and just as much me as you. So hopefully you enjoyed it. And we want to thank our sponsor. If you need a new furnace, make sure you get in touch with Alan or Brian at Hemingway's and learn more about Lux Air Furnaces and the financing options they have available. They can sell, they can install, they can service. All furnaces, by the way, they service. They have parts on hand, so get it done quick. 662-6997. And again, thank you for joining us today on Saturday with Seniors here.